Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. As part of our how-to series, today we will be looking at how to understand what it is I mean when I say to work in the power column. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we will get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars or purchase any of my mind-body guides, also known as the PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Now, without further ado, let's take a closer look at just what it is you are supposed to be doing when you are living in your power column. Recent questions are helping me get the three-column system into sharper and sharper focus as the viewing and listening audience becomes more and more sophisticated in their own understandings, and the questions become even deeper. So thank you to all of you out there. One of the questions that has popped up a number of times of late is the question of what to do in the power column. What is it I'm saying to do on a day-to-day basis? Now, I will freely admit that the power column is the trickiest of the three columns to have a guidebook on, in a sense, because it is by far the most personal column and the one that gets closest to being directly therapeutic. Think about it this way. While the emotions column is quite therapeutic and organizing of your emotional themes, what it really asks of you is to just be aware of those emotional themes. Just by being aware of them, you can take away the onset and uptick in symptoms, but you don't need to do anything else with them other than process them more in a kind of general sense. The doubt column, in the meantime, has plenty of activity required, but it is a much more intellectual endeavor. Feelings are meant to be left out of it entirely, so that we can have only science and logic hammering away against the doubts that emerge or creep in or back in. Once again, we have a column with a very defined task. Articulate and recognize all doubts as they come in, build a system to get your answers, and use each answer to continue to help you feel that your broad level understanding of the mind-body process is more and more settled. You work to reduce all lack of certainty, questions, confusion, and fear. Fear does have an emotional component, but the solution to that aspect of doubt is actually power column work, which I will explain shortly. The same can be said for the third level of doubt. The first two, is this a mind-body process, and just how far can we go in getting the symptoms alleviated, are the work of the doubt column, and they are almost uniformly intellectual endeavors. But the third level of doubt, can I master the symptoms, me? Or is there something in my personality, situation, or symptom profile that will stand in the way? Also becomes power column work. We can use our intellect to help conquer parts of that third level doubt, but the chances are we are going to need to do some personal work in the power column to feel at rest about who we are in order to beat that part of the doubt for good and come to a greater peace with ourselves. To understand what to do in the power column, let's identify more clearly the problems we're going to engage with in it. One is the problem of what to do about those emotional themes we've been recognizing to manage acute symptoms. This is one of the main tasks of the power column. Another power column task is dealing with fear, as I said earlier. In the doubt column, we identify it, but it is in the power column that we work to resolve it. And the last task that flows in from the other columns is level 3 doubt. Doubts about your ability to succeed with the system. That's 3 tasks for the power column before we've even gotten into what the power column is all about in and of itself. Bringing in what the power column is all about, thankfully, begins to address these 3 issues. Remember, the power column is about getting to a place of peace in your relationship with yourself. It is about understanding who you are at your core, accepting the full experience of what happened to you, your trauma, and crafting a new plan for what you are going to do about that way of living so that it can be different. If that sounds somewhat familiar to you, it is because I have just described the core narrative. This is the first of 2 main tasks that are purely in the power column. The first of 2 things you're going to be doing in the power column. Forming your core narrative is the preparation, and you form it until it is razor sharp and can continue to inform you with respect to how to orient yourself in your life. The second main action in the power column, to be clear, the first is to build and use the core narrative in your life, so we're going to get into the specifics of how to use it, is to recognize when you are out of power, why that occurred, and to figure out what you can do in those moments to climb right back into power. So let me say it again. The 2 things you are going to do in your power column are to use the core narrative to guide you to an aligned sense of self and to assess your power levels and adjust them accordingly. One more time, because this is what this video is all about. The 2 things you are going to do in your power column are to use the core narrative to guide you to an aligned sense of self, and secondly, to assess your power levels and adjust them accordingly. What I just said is what you're going to do in the power column. That is how you will live in the power column. I will say more shortly, but first let me address the flow of the other columns and what to do with those in power, and then we'll get to the two main power column ideas in terms of what you need to do. In working on your emotional themes, you need to remember that the first sentence of the core narrative is essentially a giant mashup monster theme of the emotion column themes. It is the Frankenstein of themes, sewn together from many different parts but forming the central, most important whole. This means that your emotional themes are already going to be worked on here. They're embedded in the core narrative. In addition, as you assess power and adjust, you are working on each of those individual emotional themes as you encounter them. So in this way, the power column frees you up to work on those emotional themes in a specific how-to sort of way, and that relies on the core narrative, and it relies on assessing and adjusting power. The doubt column brings us two things to work on in the power column: fear and third level doubt. The work of the power column, once again, fits completely naturally with these by the two main functions of the power column. So again, you're going to be working on the core narrative and how it applies, and you're going to be assessing power and adjusting. And those things naturally address fear and third level doubt. Fear gets addressed by the core narrative, in that knowing who we are gives us conviction and bolsters us against worries. We know who we are and what we need, and that makes courageous action much, much easier to take, including it makes everything more clear about what action to take. Fear also gets addressed in assessing power and adjusting, because fear actually comes from not feeling powerful, in addition to actually causing you to not feel powerful. When we don't feel powerful, we are indeed quite vulnerable. But when we are powerful, we aren't in danger anymore. So addressing those levels of power wipes fear out. Third level doubts, in other words, about the self, also get addressed by both the core narrative and assessing and adjusting power. The core narrative is the exact thing, in fact, that settles third level doubt. Once we have a good core narrative, we are on our journey with ourselves that is crystal clear, and this eradicates doubt about ourselves. We are now the hero of our story, and we actually know it. Adopting and accepting a full core narrative obliterates third level doubt. Assessing and adjusting power is the maintenance that follows in that work. Just to keep organized, remember that I have now addressed how the other columns flow into power and how the tasks at hand in the power column address those. I have also identified the two actions you will take in the power column. All the time, those two actions. The last thing I need to do now is to give you the nuts and bolts of those two tasks. I've already done so in a previous video with respect to how to build the core narrative. But even so, I'll sum up a little bit. We know the three sentences: who you are at your core, created by an accurate amalgamation of the emotional themes, what happened to you because of that narrative, and what you are going to do to live differently and in full alignment with yourself. But in the power column, you're also going to use that core narrative. We build it, and then we use it. How? Well, you are going to measure what is happening in your life against that emotional mantra of the core narrative. When things aren't aligning, you will use the principles in the core narrative to come up with an action step that realigns yourself with that core narrative. Let me give an example. If you aren't liking a job because it runs counter to your core narrative, you do not have to leave it immediately. You might need the stability or the money. But you can begin to craft a plan forward where you aren't going to be at that job forever. And it just is a means to an end. In that way, you're not out of the flow of your core narrative. You're not out of the flow of your journey. Here's another example. If you are in a toxic relationship that runs counter to your core narrative and what needs to happen for you to be happy, you can use the clarity of the core narrative to get yourself out. No one, and I mean no one, is worth you sacrificing who you are at your core. The only possible exception is your kids, if you have them, because they didn't ask for this life journey, and they are the one set of people we do owe to sometimes put ourselves second, even at our core. But even then, there are generally ways to live truly at our core and still help them with theirs. I'll give you a third example. If you are living a life where one of your dreams isn't being met, particularly if it doesn't run counter to important logistics and realities, Your core narrative is going to push you towards that dream, and you need to listen to your core and do something about it. So you can hear in these examples how the core narrative allows for clarity and a sense of purpose driving towards the things that resolve these problems. Symptoms, in fact, are doing this very thing too when it comes to power. They want you to be happy. They will not leave well enough alone. That's how you use the core narrative. Use it to square up what you really think and feel and then live by that code. Ask yourself, am I living by my core narrative? Does this fit with the core narrative? And how can I get it to fit with that? Choose action steps that honor the core narrative and achieve its goals. The second task of the power column is assessing power and adjusting when necessary. So let's remember, there are 3 types of power relationships: power with yourself, power with others, and power with your symptoms. The work of the power column comes, aside from the core narrative application, in cycling through these 3 power dynamics and first assessing them, and secondly adjusting where needed. Now, how do you assess them? This part is actually pretty easy. The question is at base, do you feel good in this setup or not? If you don't, you're not in power. If you do, you are. So first, with respect to yourself, ask yourself in any given situation, do I feel good about me here? If not, why not? Pinpoint that answer. Once you have that answer, you've identified the power problem with the self and can begin thinking through ways to return yourself to power. That is the adjustment. Here's an example. You're at a dinner party and you find yourself criticizing yourself and comparing yourself negatively to everyone around you. You've taken the first step if you've recognized you've slipped out of power with yourself, because that doesn't feel good. When you are in power with yourself, you won't be critical of who you are at all. The next step is to figure out what set that off. What thoughts and feelings were you having that led to that slip out of power? Whether it was an internal thought process or some interaction outside. Next, we challenge the inaccurate thoughts and feelings that are perpetuating that experience. You can't fake this, but try to recognize that you are not being honest with yourself when you are in self-critical mode. You truly aren't. So you can now get very honest with yourself and challenge those thoughts. I'm not saying this is easy, but this is the task, and you will get better with practice. Once you are seeing it clearly, you can then start to make some decisions about what to do about it. Following this example, you might then use your core narrative to counter the criticisms and climb back into power. You might say, it's not relevant who these people are in comparison to me. They haven't lived my life. They aren't me. They know nothing about who I am or what I need. I know that, and I can take care of that myself. Now let me get right back to it and get interested in who these people are without it having anything to do with who I am. There is a part of people that inherently wants to dominate other people. We can't help it. Goodists are wonderful because they do not allow this impulse to win the day. Bravo, goodists. But the good news is, you do not have to dominate anyone to be powerful. Power is not about domination. That is, in fact, false power, and it is all that most people have, because they don't understand what we do. Recognize the aggression and disentangle yourself from it. You do not need to assert your dominance to be back in power. What you need to do is to adjust something internal. One way is to recognize that whatever is going on for them in their own power dynamics has nothing to do with you. Being on your own journey allows you to remember your real power in your core narrative with yourself. But you can recognize what the other person may have done to try to diminish your power and put in a boundary, even if only within yourself, to prevent this from continuing, or if the lack of power came from you, you can stop bringing yourself down a peg. With symptoms and power, it is an even easier task. If you're using the doubt column, you have little work to do in the power column with respect to symptoms. The only thing you will need to look out for now is if you are viewing the symptoms not only as dominant over you, but as a sign that you are not good or weak or powerless. Remember that the symptoms are really just a communication. They are you. They cannot dominate you. Remember their function, especially as it pertains to going after your dreams. Listen to the symptoms and take action that aligns with what they are telling you you want, and you will no longer have a power struggle with the symptoms. It is the easiest to resolve of the power column issues between self, others, and symptoms. Just listen to the symptoms, take them at their word, and have that feed right into your core narrative. Continue to assess if you feel in power or not. Identify the specific problem that is making you feel not powerful, and choose a good action step that addresses the issue. Meanwhile, if any of you find yourself getting confused when I'm talking, I get it. I'm saying a lot. Take it a sentence at a time. Seriously, integrate it over time. Go back in the video. Go look at the sentence again. Let it flow in and trust that eventually it is going to get settled. But don't get focused on criticizing the system because that won't help you integrate the information. And don't criticize you either. It's hard work to understand this stuff. But it is all right here if you give yourself time to let it percolate and form more fully inside you. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally.